Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, as ever, we're here to talk about The Devil All the Time. And also to talk about The Devil All the Time, a new Netflix movie directed by Antonio Campos, based on a novel by Daniel Ray Pollock, about sadness, death, violence, and death and sadness and violence in rural America. And then, once we've dealt with that, we'll be moving on to Department of Truth #1, a new conspiracy horror comic from Image, written by James Tynion IV, drawn by Martin Simmons, and lettered by Aditya Bidikar. But before all that, Alistair, what else have you experienced this fortnight?
So I've been watching Brave New World, which is a new show that's on Peacock in the US, but available here through Now TV, which is an adaptation of Aldous Huxley's novel from the 1930s, Brave New World. It's a book I read when I was a teenager, and I really liked it. It's set in the future, and the TV show has leaned basically very heavily into the sex and drugs in the book, which is, I feel, somewhat missing the point. It's sort of set in this future single world state, which is just called the world state, which they don't mention in the TV show that it's called that, I think, because it sounds a bit New World Order conspiracy-y sort of thing. But yeah, this kind of future state where everything's automated and run by sort of machines. Everyone's genetically engineered. There's no natural births anymore. Everyone's grown in sort of in a lab and assigned this kind of rigid caste structure. There's no religion. There's no monogamy. There's no privacy. There's this sort of drug that everyone's constantly taking called Soma and kind of going to sort of sex parties and things like that. So there's a lot of that in the TV show, which is in the book, but I think they kind of missed the point that the book wasn't just basically like, look at this society that's just gone like crazy for sex and drugs. It's more kind of this idea that mass production, mass standardization, sort of machine age will replace everything we've had from the past with kind of machine versions of itself. So in the book, they have Fordism, which is this kind of secular religion, and they venerate Ford on his birthday, and they explain like by Ford instead of by God and things like that. And the idea that this sort of secular religion of mass production standardization has kind of replaced everything, including like Christian values of like monogamy and things like that. But they don't really mention any of that in the TV show. The TV show doesn't brought up Fordism, doesn't have people exclaiming by Ford, which I think could have been fun. There's also this like a lot of the plot revolves around the fact there's like one bit of the world where there's a sort of reservation for people who live like we do now. In the book, it's a sort of weird place where all the world's religions are kind of being mashed together. They call it the Savage Land, which probably in the 1930s you could get away with calling part of the world the Savage Land. It seems a bit odd in a contemporary TV show, but it's interesting. It's got an interesting thriller plot that they've sort of grafted in from nowhere.
Of course, in Marvel Comics continuity, the Savage Land is a place in the Arctic Circle where dinosaurs live, and it's a sort of weird, anachronistic jungle full of people in loincloths and people who look like Tarzan.
Again, you could probably get away with that in the past, but not so much anymore.
It's still in the comics.
All right. Yeah, in this they've really expanded the plot line in the Savage Land. They've taken what's quite a small book with only a limited amount of plot and kind of expanded it by adding sort of multiple concurrent overlapping stories, I guess, to bring it up to like TV show length plot.
Yeah, just to be clear, when you say they exclaim by Ford, is that the car guy?
Yeah, as in like Henry Ford is kind of like the deity of their society that celebrates mass production and sort of mass standardization.
I don't have enough grasp of history to know how current that reference was at the time. Was Henry Ford a more current figure in the 30s, you said, when this book was written?
Yeah, I think he'd be a more well-known person.
You think if they did it nowadays, they'd be exclaiming, "Buy jobs!" or something.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I think that's exactly what it would be like, yeah. Yeah, very much the Steve Jobs of his day.
I can see why they might have gone for, let's not date ourselves, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. It would have come across as really dated. If they'd used that in the TV show, people would have been, although it's probably a nice touch from the book, yeah, people would have probably found that a bit weird.
Well, as you've said before on this very show, you get the future, the sort of sci-fi dystopia, utopia based on your values at the time. So have they attempted to turn this into a 2020s dystopia, utopia, or is it still from the 30s?
Yeah, it's kind of more 2020 sort of dystopia. They've added like various some 2020 things, like there's a internet thing through contact lenses that they wear. There's quite a cool sort of thing they've added, which is whenever you look at someone, their caste kind of appears in like a floating bubble next to their head. So you're constantly being reminded of the social hierarchy, which is a nice adaptation from the book. I guess their sort of contemporary dystopia is like everyone's just zonked out on sex and drugs and the internet and not really noticing that they're living in a sort of totalitarian society.
That almost feels like a slightly dated dystopia. I feel like, didn't we move past everyone's just endlessly fucking and high and move on to everyone's just walking around sadly online as our main dystopia?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I'm very much filtering my dystopian views through Black Mirror there, but I feel like we moved on to that at some stage.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a Black Mirror dystopia.
That's something, I suppose.
It's a bit more dated than that. They've also kind of made it like, it feels slightly more like a sort of authoritarian 1984 sort of dystopia. The first episode begins with like a character who's been monogamous or really only taking one sexual partner, which is obviously frowned upon in their society, being sort of like taken in and told quite sternly, like, what you're doing is against society, and if you don't change, you will be punished, sort of thing. And I was like, the book is really, it's not that kind of authoritarian dystopia, it's more the sort of comfy, cosseting, cozy dystopia that gives you nice, numbing drugs and doesn't realise it's controlling every aspect of your existence. But I guess maybe that's harder to get across in a TV show, or people are more worried now about more directly authoritarian dystopia.
Yeah, I did sort of want to watch this because Grant Morrison is involved in it, and he's a comic writer who's done, well, he wrote the Doom Patrol comics you read. He's done various other bits like The Invisibles, which is kind of another shadowy powers behind the world story from the sort of 90s conspiracy action. Arguably has a bit in common with Department of Truth, but we'll get into that. But yeah, because Morrison was involved, I was vaguely interested. But to be honest, it seems to have landed with kind of a muted thud. No one seems that excited by it.
Yeah, I did notice his name in the credits, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I did think that getting a comic writer to do a TV adaptation is a good idea, because you're kind of telling the story in like sequential installments, rather than in like a single unit like a book or a film.
He's definitely got, as I say, he's done work that touches on this sort of conspiracy-laden, vaguely dystopian future stuff before. Quite a lot, to be honest. It's an area he's worked in, so I can see the appeal.
Yeah, I'm surprised this hasn't caused more of an impact. I guess it's a high-profile adaptation of a famous novel. It's fine, I suppose, overall.
It did look kind of fine based on like the handful of bits of footage I've seen. The few reviews I've read and bits of footage I've seen have all looked very fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting if you like the book. I guess this is maybe a recommendation of, if you like the book and you want to see how they've tried to adapt it to make it modern and make it work for TV and things like that, then there's a recommendation for that. I suppose if you want a show that's just got people like on drugs and fucking, and there's a sort of dystopian thing going on, and there's like a thriller bit where people get chased around in the American wilderness, it's entertaining. It's a sort of guided recommendation. Watch the first couple of episodes, you'll get a flavour of it. So that's what I've been up to. Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, speaking, as we vaguely were a few minutes ago, about slightly dated references, I have been catching up with the culture of 2009 by finally playing through the video game Batman Arkham Asylum, based on, in fact, the graphic novel by Grant Morrison and Dave McKean. It's all connected, in which Batman has to fight his way through Arkham Asylum after it's taken over by the inmates. Only, of course, in the video game version, there's a lot more inmates and a lot more random goons and a lot more random puzzles where he has to find special hidden panels or bash down walls or push things around. But yeah, this is, of course, probably one of the most successful and influential games of its time, I think. I remember it being pretty huge when it came out in 2009. Like, I bought it as soon as it went on, sale a few months later, only to discover that the PC I had at the time was too shit to play it. But 11 years, and I think possibly 2 PCs later, I can now play Arkham Asylum. And yeah, it's really good. Why did no one tell me? But it's mostly the sort of the immersiveness of it, I guess. The fact that it does actually do a surprisingly good job, even on PC gaming, which is very fiddly and remember which key to pressy, especially for me, someone who isn't really a hardened gamer, or even a softened gamer, to be honest. I basically play about one game a decade. But even with having to occasionally go, shit, is this R or F or Q? What the fuck's going on? I still found it a pretty immersive way of, slicing through about 6 henchmen at once, punching one, then going back to elbow another and kick another 2, and then grappling up to this gargoyle so I could sort of swoop down on another one and take him out from behind. If you ever wanted to, be Batman and swoop around in the rafters, taking out thugs one at a time silently, then yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah, I've heard great things about this game. I've not played it, but a lot of my friends who are much more into gaming than me do really, really rate it.
It's been years, mate. You could probably get it for about 20p now.
Yeah, I think it's transitioned to kind of modern classic. I mean, it came out just after the Dark Knight film, so it was the peak of kind of Nolan Batman mania. So does it kind of tap into the Nolan feel of Batman?
A little. It's in that it's got this quite heavy, grey, realistic vibe going on, although it's going a little bit more for the sort of gothic high camp thing. The villains are very darkly flamboyant. Like, there's the Jokers in it, and he's sort of, rather than being the Heath Ledger Joker, he's more a sort of grim, realistic version of the animated series Joker, if anything. I mean, helped by the fact that he's voiced by Mark Hamill here. I think the last few times he played it was in the Arkham games. So yeah, it's got this sort of cartoon goth vibe going on. Everything's very wrinkly and grey and textured, and quite a bit of a steampunk vibe going on at times, actually. Lots of sort of pipes and things turning into monsters with green goo injected into them and stuff. It does suffer from the one weakness of Batman's Rogues Galleon, but they're all obviously just crazy people in gimmicky costumes. A lot of the boss fights are just sort of fighting a large number of henchmen while the supervillain stands off to the side waving at you, which is, a weakness of the format. I guess because they didn't want to go full cartoon and have them get into like a robot suit or something. So they didn't seem to fully find a way around that. I have actually got one of the sequels, Batman Arkham City, on my PC as well for another Steam sale. So I'm excited to see if they ever found a way to deal with this. I mean, I don't know if my PC will be able to run it, but if it can.
Yeah, I guess the idea of sort of fighting your way through Arkham Asylum is kind of a great way to locate all of Batman's villains in sort of one place at one time. And yeah, I suppose I'm providing a kind of cool gothic setting. I mean, I like how in almost every Batman comic, video game or film or TV thing I've watched, that Arkham is always this kind of decaying, decrepit Victorian institution that's clearly like got a sort of a bad history and is quite a creepy place.
Yeah, I assume you haven't read Batman Arkham Asylum, the graphic novel.
No, I haven't read that one, no. The one that it's based on.
Yeah, it's the same premise basically, but yeah, that's probably one of the root texts for the sort of main interpretation of Arkham Asylum as this horrible, like, evil haunted house. Like, there's the whole backstory in that book about how the founder of Arkham Asylum, Jeremiah Arkham, basically ended up going mad and doing a load of murders, all described in grisly, gory detail. So yeah, it's very much playing into that sort of goth haunted house thing, and it provides a nice sort of setting for the game in that you've got this sort of open world and there's these different sections of the island Arkham is on, and it has different buildings and you can sort of wander around between them. I don't know if I've fully bought into like modern open world gaming though. I found sort of schlepping across the island to get to the next level quite tedious at times. I don't want to commute game, just teleport me to the next bit of plot.
Yeah, I found that when I played, I think the last game I played like that was like Far Cry 3, which was probably over 10 years ago now. Although it was a great game, I did find the schlepping somewhat annoying.
Yeah, I mean, it helps when you get towards the end of the game and Batman gains access to various zippy gadgets that let him travel across space a bit faster by launching grappling lines across it and sliding along them and stuff like that. But yeah, the commuting was a bit tiresome, but that aside, no, it's a really fun game. As I say, I have the sequel lined up after maybe a short break. I don't know, I've been torn between either going straight into Arkham City or maybe seeing if I can bring myself to play a game that isn't about Batman. I don't know, I haven't decided. Or maybe I'll just wait another 10 years then play Arkham City.
You could play another game about Batman that isn't like Lego Batman, which is a very different Batman vibe.
That is one of the last games I played, to be honest. I think the last game I played was it Lego Batman or was it Portal? I mean, I've played a couple of games for this podcast, but the last game I actually played from beginning to end in like single player mode. I have got BioShock on here. I hear that's fun.
Oh, BioShock's brilliant.
In fact, I've got BioShock, BioShock 2 and BioShock Infinite, even though I've never played any of them, because again, there was a bundle or something and it was very cheap.
Do them in order, but yeah, the original BioShock is great. I do love that.
Maybe I'll try that if I want to consider not playing Batman. And if you get bored, I'll just go back to Batman, because of course you can never get wrong with the Bat brand. Hashtag Bat brand.
Next, this episode, we'll be reviewing The Devil All the Time, a new film starring Tom Holland, Sebastian Stan, Eliza Sacklin, and Robert Pattinson. The film follows the interconnected stories of several families that link two towns in Ohio between the 1940s and the 1960s, including a pair of serial killers, two orphan children, a predatory preacher, and a cop being pulled into organised crime. We saw this film recently, so Nick, what did you think of it?
I thought it was a sort of nicely filmed trudge, to be honest. It had its moments when it finally got going, but I can imagine this maybe made a better book than it did film, because as a film this just seems to be a long catalogue of bad things happening. Like, you could easily substitute the devil in the title of this film to shit happens, and maybe expand the suffix as well so it's just shit happens all the fucking time, because yeah, it's just a bleak, dreary series of violent things happening to characters who haven't really been fleshed out enough for me to care in this nice rural backdrop. The actors are trying very hard. Tom Holland does do a good job of making a character who could have been either annoying or unsympathetic sort of just about work. But yeah, it always becomes slightly comical by about an hour in. Like, is there anyone in this specific geographical area who doesn't have like some kind of unsettling violent tendencies? Like, this isn't a Coen Brothers-esque dark comedy, or if it is, the comedy is very, very low key. It's just a sort of thumpingly bleak film about people suffering. It probably made a better book if you'd written this stuff out more and gone more into the skin of individual characters. I did a very brief bit of Wikipedia looking into the book, and it seems like it's more of a sort of collection of short sequences, which might write all the bits up as short stories and maybe get into them a bit more, and that might work better. I don't know if I see myself reading it, but I can maybe imagine that. But no, this film, I don't know, it's nicely made, and it's nicely shot, and it's well acted, and I guess therefore I feel vaguely bad utterly trashing it. It didn't really work for me.
I was about to say I think I enjoyed it more than you did, but enjoy is really not the word for what is quite a bleak and depressing story. I think maybe I appreciated it more. I mean, I do take your point. It is quite long. It's like way over 2 hours, and it's quite slow paced, and it is obviously quite dark, and quite a lot of grim things happen. I thought there was a sort of like poetic beauty to it. Yeah, there wasn't a huge amount of characterization, but there was, I don't know, there's something about the kind of poverty of it, the the sort of the setting, the way it kind of was bookend by horrendous wars. Like it begins with the Tom Holland character's father discovering one of his soldiers in his platoon in the Second World War has been skinned alive, and kind of ends with the Tom Holland character signing up to go to Vietnam. And the way, I guess, that like the violence of war has sort of led through to this like really, really poor society. I thought there was something kind of tragic bleakness to it. Whether you wanted to experience that for 2.5 hours is quite a lot of it.
I still feel like they could have made. There's a better version of this which focuses it a bit more on the Tom Holland character and cuts down dramatically on some of the fucking diversions.
Yeah, I think they were going for a sort of Lock, Stock-esque kind of thing when there's like loads of characters and then they sort of move in and out of each other's lives and it kind of all weaves together at the end, which they sort of achieve. Although it is kind of brought together a bit more by coincidence rather than plotting, in that the Tom Holland character murders someone, as happens quite a lot in the book, and then gets picked up by, in the film, probably in the book as well, to be fair, then gets picked up by the serial killer couple because he happens to be hitchhiking along the same road that links the two towns. Yeah, and then that kind of resolves that plot line and leaves into resolving the Sebastian Stan cop on the edge plot line.
I found the cop on the edge plot line particularly superfluous. Like, surely they could have cut most of that.
Yeah, that was definitely a bit, underplayed. I get the feeling that maybe he had more of a role when his character was more fleshed out to be the size of like the kind of Robert Pattinson or Tom Holland character, but that they thought, no, it's just too long. We have to lose some of this. Possibly, that's just my speculation.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the author is at least somewhat involved in this film in that he plays the narrator, the author of the book, I mean. And yeah, I don't know if that made it hard to give this screenplay the aggressive slashing that I personally feel it kind of needed.
Yeah, I didn't really like the performances. Tom Holland playing very much against type for, I guess as we sort of think of him as Peter Parker. Yeah, in this he sort of, had this kind of wiry toughness to him. And the sort of simmering anger and resentment that he managed to bring across quite well. And there's quite a lot of good performances to mention, but like Robert Pattinson especially as this predatory preacher preying on his parishioners, using his status as a kind of community leader to seduce young women, including the cousin of the Tom Holland character played by Eliza Sacklin. He's very, very good at playing against type, being sort of a creepy kind of predatory preacher that was quite unnerving.
Robert Pattinson seemed to be sort of playing it slightly big and kind of enjoying himself, which was not what everyone else was doing, but it was quite entertaining.
Yeah, I think that people are going for this, sort of almost like social realism, like, small performances, whereas obviously Pattinson's not. But I think because he's playing a preacher, he's a character with like a lot of personality, a loud voice, who's kind of like a big character in every way, in the sense that he's a sort of like a loud, confident, bombastic individual.
I wasn't criticising, it was quite fun.
Yeah, no, I thought it worked well. And obviously there was Dudley from Harry Potter, Henry Melling. It was, I couldn't fault his American accent.
Yeah, I mean, Holland and Pattinson are both also British, of course. We're very much in the golden age of Brits pretending to be American.
Yeah. Even
in like gritty, deep local American dramas like this, they really have infiltrated the whole organisation.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Harry Melling storyline, where I'll refrain from doing actual detailed plot spoilers because there's really no point, but he does some violence. Some violence is done. As with all the storylines in this film, it ends violently. Yeah, that was about where I've started to sense that this was not going to be a cheerful film, when they went from one violent vignette to a second violent vignette. And also, to be fair, when I looked at my watch and thought, okay, I've now watched nearly 45 minutes of this, and Tom Holland, the biggest face on the poster, has yet to appear. This is not going to be a focused movie, is it?
No, that is the thing, which is, if you watch the trailer starts with the Tom Holland character's birthday.
The film does not.
Well, that is the first appearance of his character, but it's about 45 minutes into the film. There's a lot about his father, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I've probably become a bit of a parody of myself at this point, but yeah, personally I would heavily advocate slashing huge chunks of the first 45 minutes and trying to get the father's storyline down to some sort of montage.
It is quite long.
I mean, if anything, I think you should expand the Tom Holland character's storyline. I think he needed more time to really flesh out that character, and in return you just chop the shit out of everyone else's.
They leaned a lot, I think, on really trying to explain what his childhood was like, because I guess the Tom Holland character is the character that's in most of the entire film. It's just, for a lot of it, it's when he's a child and is played by a different actor. So I guess what they're leaning on is the fact that they really want you to understand what his childhood was like, how his parents met, the world he was born into, what he grew up with. I suppose that's his characterization. But I think, there's a good point here, which is they've kind of lent too heavily on backstory and explaining like where he's from, rather than not explaining enough about who he is right now and, how he relates to the world in the present.
I mean, as I say, it's something that probably would work a lot better as a novel, because you could do this reasonably deep characterization on a large number of characters with, internal monologue. But I might be wrong here, but a lot of the films that have pulled off this sort of multiple characters intersecting around each other's lives have been quite heightened or quite silly or quite genre-y. Like, I'm thinking of your various obvious examples like Pulp Fiction, or what was it we saw the other year, Three Billboards, or probably some other films. I haven't seen Lock, Stock, which you mentioned, but maybe that's like that as well. And all those films are either knowing comedies or genre films, which can lean quite heavily into tropes or stereotypes to, give you a character quickly, whereas The Devil All the Time, or at least the film version, this, is trying to be quite a sort of understated literary thing. And as a result, everyone's quite quiet and mumbly, and they never really get the chance to do anything before it cuts to another scene with a different character.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, definitely. And I think, Lock, Stock is certainly in the vibe of like the films you mentioned, like Three Billboards, things like that. You're right, these films tend to be more fast-paced, they tend to be more, have a sense of humour, or rely on quite a lot of engaging action scenes and things like that. I mean, a lot of like Guy Ritchie films, I was trying to think of those are Guy Ritchie stuff, or the stuff that's heavily influenced by Guy Ritchie, like Layer Cake. Obviously, like films he made like Snatch, Rock and Roller, do this sort of thing very well, but they're very, like I say, they're quite genre-y, they're quite stylized. They've got a lot of kind of magnetic characters doing like big performances, a lot of action, a lot of quips, whereas this is a very much a slow version of this. Interesting, before you mentioned like the Coen brothers, I think they are trying to go for like a darker Coen brothers vibe. I think the film it most sort of reminded me of is probably No Country for Old Men, in that another kind of bleak film set in the sort of the poorer, more desolate parts of America about horrific violence. But that film has this simmering just tension throughout the whole film, even though that is quite a slow-paced film, although I don't think it's quite as long as The Devil All the Time. There's just always this sense of tension of something that simmers below the surface that could explode at any point. And although in this film there is the constant threat of violence, because almost every character meets a violent end or engages in some violence, or both, I think, what it doesn't have is that sense of tension. There's not that, like throughout the whole thing, that like, you don't get the sense of like, that, violence is kind of lurks beneath the surface. You kind of just get the sense that like, it's just a bleak existence. And then at one point, some random act of violence will just carry you off.
And it's possible to get sort of immersed in the flow of it. By about halfway through, I did kind of want to see what happened, although I did also, about half an hour before the end, more or less guess what was going to happen. But once he's left his hometown and started hitchhiking, and there are some serial killers preying on hitchhikers, there's the sheriff who's related to the serial killers, you can sort of see where it's going from a mile off, and it doesn't really swerve it. But there is a certain air of sort of tragic inevitability that it does lean into. Yeah,
which I don't know is the sort of the vibe they're going for.
Maybe. Part of me almost wants to read the book. I can imagine this might have been a better book, but I wasn't sure this entirely worked.
Yeah, I can imagine people have really been gripped by the book. Because, and especially like the voiceover. And I'm not really a fan of like heavy voiceover exposition stories, but the voiceover thing really did help weave it together and link it all up. And I can imagine the voiceover is lifted heavily from the book and the sort of the prose of the book. I did feel this was an interesting, perhaps, companion piece to Teenage Bounty Hunters, in that it was a window into that kind of very religious, very conservative, poor Southern American society, which is not really something I know a lot about, but it is interesting to see inside it. This is very much us on the bleak side. I mean, I should have probably looked into the author a bit more before I make some wild speculations. What I got from the film was more of an outsider's perspective, more than look at how bleak this poverty is, and people don't have anything, and they are preyed upon by the few people with any status in their community, and most of them meet violent ends and permit acts of violence without conscience or consequence. And that seems to be a quite almost unsympathetic portrayal of these characters' lives. It might not be unrealistic, but at least with Teenage Bounty Hunters, you're seeing almost like from inside the society out, and kind of saying, yes, there's problems of like hate and prejudice in here, but there's also love as well. Although they are different in many ways, the two texts, I did feel there was that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of what I was saying about characterization, really. I mean, I don't think this needed necessarily someone to come in and turn it into a Teenage Bounty Hunter style quippy comedy, but as I say, I felt like you could have used maybe giving the characters a bit more humanity.
Finally, in this episode, we will be discussing Department of Truth, a new comic from Image by James Tynion IV and Martin Simmons. This comic follows Cole Turner, a CIA agent who investigates conspiracy theories, who discovers the terrifying truth that all conspiracies are real. We have read the first issue, so Nick, what did you think of it?
I mean, firstly, and I've been guilty of being a slightly writing-orientated critic in the past, but this is a lovely-looking comic. I've actually read a few comics by Martin Simmons before. He's done a few bits, like he did a series called Friendo, and he did some issues of Immortal Hulk, I think, or at least one issue. But yeah, this is some above and beyond stuff here. There's a very sort of painterly Dave McKean semi-abstract, super atmospheric thing going on. And yes, it's very distinctive, and the lettering by Aditya Bitakar is also very distinctive and cool, and goes above and beyond to produce a very sort of immersive atmosphere, which, since we're in a sort of vague world of abstract horror where you sort of struggle with what's real, I think the vibe here works quite well. And yeah, this was good, I thought. This is one of these concepts that feels almost alarmingly sort of knocking on the door relevant. Like, fair play, you couldn't have timed this better if you tried. It almost feels odd that this must have been written months ago, whereas the rise of conspiracy theories in the popular narrative has really only happened in the last couple of months. In terms of being like a prescient horror writer, I feel like James Tynion IV has done pretty well here. And, you know, as ever, when we review just the first issue of a comic, this is a lot of setup, this is a lot of taking the time to really roll out the high concept, and you could say that it doesn't do much beyond that, but also that's not really a criticism. You know, you can sort of guess at where it might go next. I'd be interested to see how they're going to turn this into an ongoing story. Is it going to be like a case of the month or case of the series of months? Will it work? Will it get samey? Will they flesh out the characters more? But for now, yeah, in terms of establishing a distinctive style and atmosphere and laying out the concept, I thought this was pretty good.
Yeah, by the end of the first episode, I think they've introduced everything they need to introduce to kind of get the story going. The main character, his background, the fact that he now works for the Department of Truth, and what they're sort of fighting against. Yeah, I did like how the first issue is a tour of all recent conspiracies, or kind of prominent conspiracies of the moment. There's Flat Earthers, he goes to a Flat Earth convention. I think QAnon gets a nod at some point. The Koch brothers and their influence on politics is pretty much name-checked. There's two oil billionaire brothers whose name I think was about as close to Coke as they could legally get. So yeah, it is a good sort of knowing tour of recent conspiracy theories. If you've been following the news, you'll get what they're nodding to each time. And there's a few nods to some of the the great classics of the kind of insane conspiracy genre. JFK, moon landing.
Well, yeah, I think I don't know the historical extent that JFK really was the birth of conspiracy theories. But that's clearly what they're kind of going for here.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of... I'm not a huge conspiracy theoryologist. There probably is actually an actual term, but someone who studies conspiracy theories. I don't know if you could trace kind of JFK's assassination as kind of the nexus of modern conspiracy theories. I'm sure there's been conspiracy theories before that. Conspiracy theories are probably about as old as time. But yeah, that's kind of a good, I guess, point to draw some of the modern unexplained questions of the world to the Kennedy assassination. There's definitely more than a hint. There's almost like pretty explicitly said that one of the conspiracy theories they will be going to in detail in this comic is the Kennedy assassination. And that's kind of introduced in I thought, a very, wow, that's a bold move way. And if I'm being unhelpfully cryptic about this, it's because it's kind of very much a revelation that's revealed in the last panel on the last page. So I don't know if we want to spoil it so soon into the discussion.
I don't need to spoil it at this stage, no.
No, there's definitely going to be digging into Kennedy conspiracies, and I thought this is an interesting take on the Kennedy conspiracy.
Yeah, I don't really have a clue where it's going. I liked the way they saved that final twist for the last page. Like the general premise, the basic concepts of the comic, which is laid out in the last few pages before that, but did sort of, slowly dawn on me in the few pages as it came up to it. Like, there's a couple of horrific revelations in the final few pages, I guess, or the last quarter of the comic, and it becomes clear what they're doing, and then in case you haven't got it, or just to hammer it home, he then tells you what they're doing, and then you get this sort of, okay, I've had it all, and then you turn the last page and there's one more, hit, and it's nicely done.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of structure of the first issue is it's an interview with the main character. The main character, Cole, has been interviewed, and then the story is filled in through flashbacks through his testimony. And then when he gets to the end of the story, he telling about how he discovered that all conspiracies are real. It then kind of sums the premise up of kind of ongoing forward in the last few pages. And then when I was reading it, I was feeling like, right, this is interesting, but where's it going, or how is it going to tie all this together? Unless is the next issue going to be him still in interrogation and then go okay, so tell us the second story about conspiracies in each. And I thought, but I kind of sense well, maybe they'll use that as a structure, but it doesn't seem particularly sustainable for long term as something that's interesting. It's an interesting way to tell a story, like an interrogation each week. But then in the final few pages, when they kind of pull it all together to kind of establish what the premise is going forwards, and I was I see where this is going, and that has potential. Again, being unhelpfully cryptic, so don't spoil it for people who might want to read it.
Well, yeah, I mean, broadly, the comic is about the Department of Truth. It's the title.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's going to be about the Department of Truth investigating conspiracy theories or occurrences of conspiracy theories. That's basically going to be it going forward. You know, I don't need to spoil the details of the final few pages to say that that's probably going to be what happens. There's also sort of, alongside the supernatural conspiracy theory stuff, there's also some hints of actual supernatural horror. So obviously it's going to be interesting to see how much that veers up and engulfs the narrative.
Yeah, there's a sense of, if all conspiracies are real, there's obviously
real.
Yeah, and also there's clearly a supernatural connection, I suppose, because it depends on how deep you go into these conspiracy theories. You don't have to go far before people believe there's satanic cults, lizard people from other worlds. You don't have to dig too far into conspiracy theories before you discover stuff that's basically out of science fiction and fantasy.
Well, yeah, and in terms of being horrific, I mean, we all laugh at Pizzagate correctly. But, if Pizzagate turns out to be true due to whatever the core magic of the Department of Truth is, then that actually is pretty grim.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it speaks to the fact that what you were saying is that, locating on the Kennedy assassination is kind of the nexus point for modern conspiracies, because especially during the 1960s and into the 1970s, there was a series of revelations of conspiracies in the American government was revealed, and it shook people's confidence. There was the Pentagon Papers. America had known for a very long time that the war in Vietnam was unwinnable, but they'd continued anyway and continued to lie about the fact that they were winning it and that it was winnable. And then obviously there was Watergate and things like that. So in quite a quick period of time, you go from people thinking the government is the best thing about us and it's kind of made out of all of us and is our benign parent, to what is the government hiding from us and what else is the government hiding from us. So yeah, you can see how this leads to a sort of flowering of conspiracy theories, because some conspiracies are true. There's probably not Pizzagate.
No, probably not. Although, again, if Pizzagate does turn out to be true, and I have no idea if James Tynion IV has a Pizzagate turns out to be true issue at some point. Maybe that'll end up being the light relief. But then again, if it is true, it does involve, paedophile rings and blood drinking, so maybe not.
Yeah, I guess as a writer, he may want to stay away from the most topical conspiracies, because it might mean the comic's quite dated in a few years when we've kind of all moved on.
Well, yeah, but on the other hand, he is using, now he's using real conspiracy theories based on real events, so it's not as if he's shying away from the real, well, air quotes, real stuff. So it'd be interesting to see how recent he's willing to go.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, Kennedy assassination, moon landing, and even flat Earth has kind of been around for a while. I mean, it's more of just a sense of, as a writer, how topical do you want to be, because things, can look dated quickly when you something that becomes big quickly and fades away quickly. I mean, it's just an interesting thing he wants to explore. I mean, he may be a bit more vague about what they go into, about the particular conspiracies, creating his own versions of popular conspiracy theories to kind of give it more of a veneer of fiction. And obviously now he's borrowed directly from actual conspiracy theories people believe in, like the Kennedy assassination or flat Earth. But he might also, want to fictionalize some a bit to give it this kind of sense of distance from the present, so it doesn't age really badly in a short period of time.
I don't know. It depends how much he wants that short-term buzz of being, adjacent to reality, I guess. I mean, as I say, I'm sure not unintentionally, it's a very relevant feeling vibe of horror to tap into. And as I say, it's come out at a very opportune time for people starting to truly realise how fucking terrifying it is when conspiracy theories begin to take actual hold.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very topical with QAnon and things like that being in the news. I guess it's kind of replaced Pizzagate as the big conspiracy that lots and lots of people are motivated by. So yeah, this is very topically timed.
Well, yeah, and I mean, even over here in lovely Britain, I gather we're now getting the QAnon as well. So yeah, it's a scary thing once it starts happening in reality in the actual world you live in. And yeah, I guess I'm interested to see if he's got a solution to this, or if he's. Oh, well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a horror comic, isn't it? If he just wants to show us how scary it is, then I guess his job is done.
Yeah.
But if nothing else, it is a beautifully executed comic. As I say, I really, really liked the art on this.
Yeah, the art was exceptional. I liked how abstract it was. In a comic that deals with what's real, what's not real, using a sort of abstract visual style works really well when we're playing with this sort of sense of unreality. Sort of reminded me of some other quite abstract comics you've read for the podcast. I think Descender, that uses a kind of watercoloured sense of abstraction. It kind of reminds me of that. But also reminding me of the art of Fell, which had a similar sort of grim, sort of quite dark like literally like a dark palette as well as being dark tonally sort of approach to abstraction.
Yeah, that was Ben Templesmith, wasn't it? Yeah, I guess Fed is quite similar, but it's got this quite abstract approach to style, but it's also dealing quite a lot with, quite grounded subject matter in a way. It's taking this abstract style to show how scary the world around it is, but at the same time, the actual narrative is about real people sitting at desks a lot of the time. So far, based on the one issue we've read, Department of Truth seems to be living in a similar vibe of sort of real things, scary art style.
Yeah, which I think works quite well.
And just because I mentioned him earlier, it is not dissimilar to Dave McKean as well in his stuff like Arkham Asylum.
Yeah, but the visuals really are brilliant, and it's a treat. So yeah, there's something very very nice about looking at it. And I'm just looking now ahead at the covers of some of the unreleased upcoming issues. They do continue the sort of very abstract, quite dark visual motif. So it does look absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and also the lettering by Aditya Bidikar has this sort of thing where the outlines and the colour fill-in of the balloons are slightly out of alignment, which is a nice sort of, I guess, is metaphorical the right word? I don't know. A nice sort of symbolic tie-in with the connections between conspiracy theories and reality, maybe? I mean, I know Aditya Bidikar does think a lot about his work. He's written a lot about it. He's podcasted a lot about it. So, yeah, I do think it's entirely possible that he is trying to tie in with the actual story to that extent. And it is a nice thing.
Yeah. And while we're comparing it to comics, it also kind of reminded me of another one we discussed on the podcast, which is Manhattan Projects, which is another one that weaves in actual conspiracy theories, I think including like the Illuminati and things like that are kind of like weaved into the plotline.
Yeah, but I can't imagine it's going to be as much fun as Manhattan Projects. So.
No, that was definitely more of a kind of the crazy world where conspiracies are real, where this is more of the horrendous world where conspiracies are real.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I'd enjoy fully living in either, but given a choice, I'd rather live in the Manhattan Projects, to be honest.
Yeah, this is very much a horror story, and I don't know why you choose to live in a horror story.
But having said that, I probably do live more in Department of Truth than Manhattan Projects in my real life. Shit. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then why not leave a review on your podcatcher of choice if it has a review function. iTunes, I'm told, is best, but we'll take anything, to be honest. We're not picky. And if you want yet more information about us and whatever it is we're doing, you can go to our website at moderatefantasyviolence.com, which includes all our old episodes, a few outtakes of those episodes, essays by Alistair, mostly Alistair, and so much more.
You can find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can also follow us on Twitter, where we are at MFV Podcast. If you go to our Twitter right now, I'm attending the London Film Festival virtually from my living room, so you'll be able to see my day-by-day updates of the films that I'm seeing for the festival and what I'm thinking of them. You can also get more of my opinions on films from my social media, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, that's on Twitter, and you can find even more of my opinions at my website, which is redtrainblog.com.
Yep, and I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on Twitter at NickMB and on the web internet at nickbryan.com. And yes, thank you everyone who backed the And It Snowed Kickstarter. It's definitely over now. Although, in fact, to peel back the curtain for just a second, the actual And It Snowed comics arrived at my front door while I was recording this podcast. So yep, work continues. I'll probably be sending out the surveys soon, which means those who backed will have had them by the time you hear this. It's a strange time travel thing we're doing here. Anyway, and then we'll be back in Moderate Fantasy Violence in 2 weeks. And this time we'll be covering the new HBO horror show Lovecraft Country and, of course, as we always do, the new Aaron Sorkin film, The Trial of the Chicago 7. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Get wrong with the Batbrand. Hashtag Batbrand. Which of course is what Batman does to his enemies in Batman v Superman. But that was stupid. That was stupid and bad. So
that's a different Batman. That's bad Batman.
That's the bad Batbrand. Bad Batbrand.